Joining us now is John Flesher, Deputy Director of the Conservative Environment Network. John, we were leading the show this morning with the question of whether Rishi Sunak should be spending so much taxpayer money on international climate projects. 1.6 billion he's set to confirm in his speech today at that conference. What do you say to that? What do you say to people who say, you know, we're hard up in this country? Is that the best use of our money?
I think, and thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon, both. I think the challenge, as always, with money that's spent overseas is that people are sceptical for exactly the reasons you've set out. But actually, if it's spent wisely and if it's spent properly, this is some of the best money we can spend. Net zero isn't something that we can just do in the UK and then shut our minds off to what's happening in the rest of the world. It will only be a success if we can achieve it globally, and the UK has a big role to play in that. There are countries that just cannot afford to decarbonise like we can and are struggling with the impacts of it. If we spend that money overseas and spend it wisely, we can make a meaningful difference that's good for us in terms of protecting us against the impacts of climate change.
Johnny, on that point, are you convinced that we as a nation have enough influence as you would like to see? Because one of the cornerstones of our climate policy in this country is the idea that even if we decarbonise here, one of the best things we can do is influence other carbon emitting nations to cut back on their own emissions. Do you believe that we are having that amount of influence at these types of summits?
I think we are. I mean, I think, as you'll know, the UK hosted COP28 2 years ago. When we assumed the presidency for that, the UK had adopted a net zero target. We were an outlier. We were the first major economy to adopt such a target in law. And now you've got net zero targets of varying degrees, but net zero targets that now cover, I think, over 90% of the global economy. So I think we've shown through our presidency of these talks that we have got that influence, and I think we are taken very seriously in these areas, not least given that the long-standing relationships we've got with very significant players in other parts of the world.
It's fascinating listening to people talk about the United Kingdom's emissions, of course, halved since 1990, but that hasn't come without costs. The industrial price of energy in the United Kingdom has trebled since the early 2000s. We've seen steel making leave our shores. We've seen many parts of industry that rely on energy intensity face some real trouble. Is it therefore potentially the best success story to sell around the world that potentially when it comes to energy security, yes, we've halved our emissions, but it's come at quite a cost?
I think, you're right to say that costs have gone up, but I think if you look at the UK's energy mix, one of the huge problems we've had, and certainly what's caused the spike in energy prices in the last couple of years, has been our massive reliance on gas, which is obviously a fossil fuel and is contributing to climate change. If we got more homegrown British renewable energy, which, and I know you've talked about this a lot, Tom, it's very hard to build energy, nuclear, wind, solar in the UK. If it was easier to build that, we would be less reliant on gas. And it's the gas price that's been the thing that's really driven up costs for UK consumers and UK businesses, particularly in recent years. We need to be more reliant on clean energy that isn't susceptible to those global price fluctuations like gas. If we were, we'd be much more insulated and much more secure.
Yes, and it's worth noting that the chief executive of National Gas has warned today that our gas network is maxed out at the moment in light of the cold snap we're experiencing. So concerns there. Thank you for your time, John Flesher, Deputy Director of the Conservative Environment Network.